The period between the two world wars, a time marked by global upheaval and uncertainty, saw significant transformations in many aspects of society, including the legal landscape. It was during this tumultuous era that a revolutionary movement in American jurisprudence emerged: legal realism. This school of thought challenged the traditional formalistic view of law as a self-contained logical system, which had long dominated legal thinking. Legal realists argued that law, far from being an abstract and immutable entity, was in fact a living, breathing construct. They believed it was deeply intertwined with the social, economic, and political realities of the time, reflecting the complexities and nuances of human society. This nascent movement attracted a diverse group of legal scholars, judges, and practitioners who shared a deep skepticism towards the prevailing notion of law as a purely objective and apolitical system. They sought to understand the law in its real-world context. They believed that law was not simply a matter of applying pre-existing rules to a set of facts in a mechanical fashion, but rather a dynamic process. Instead, they argued that legal decisions were influenced by a myriad of factors, including the personal biases of judges, the social context of the cases, the power dynamics between different social groups, and the broader societal implications of legal rulings. They emphasized the practical consequences of legal rulings, arguing that the impact on society should be a key consideration in judicial decision-making. Legal realism emerged as a direct response to the perceived shortcomings of legal formalism, which many felt was too rigid and disconnected from the realities of everyday life. Formalism, the dominant legal philosophy of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, maintained that law was a closed system of rules and principles that could be applied objectively to any given case, without regard to external factors. Formalists believed that judges should act as impartial umpires, mechanically applying the law without regard to their own personal beliefs or the potential social consequences of their decisions. This approach, however, was increasingly seen as inadequate. This rigid adherence to formalism, however, proved increasingly untenable in the face of the rapid social and economic changes sweeping across the United States in the early 20th century. The Industrial Revolution brought about massive changes. The rise of big business created new legal challenges, and the influx of immigrants added to the complexity of the social fabric, creating a more diverse and dynamic society, one in which the formalistic approach to law often seemed inadequate, even unjust. Legal realism sought to address these inadequacies by advocating for a more flexible and context-sensitive approach to legal interpretation and application. One of the most influential figures in the early development of legal realism was Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., a towering figure in American legal history whose impact on the legal landscape is still felt today. As a Supreme Court justice from 1902 to 1932, Holmes was renowned for his sharp intellect, his piercing insights, and his willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, often pushing the boundaries of legal thought. Holmes's contributions to legal realism were profound and far-reaching, influencing not just his contemporaries but also future generations of legal scholars. He rejected the notion of law as a system of fixed and immutable principles, arguing instead that law evolved over time in response to changing social needs and circumstances, adapting to the realities of the world. He famously declared that the life of the law has not been logic, it has been experience, emphasizing the importance of real-world context. With this assertion, Holmes laid the groundwork for a more pragmatic and context-driven approach to legal reasoning, one that considered the complexities of human behavior. Central to Holmes's jurisprudence was his belief that law should be understood from the perspective of the bad man. By this, he did not mean to endorse or glorify criminal behavior. Rather, he sought to emphasize that the law should be evaluated based on its practical effects, not on abstract moral principles, which often failed to capture the nuances of real-life situations. The bad man, in Holmes's view, was someone who was primarily concerned with the consequences of their actions, not with the technicalities of the law. Holmes argued that understanding the perspective of the bad man was essential for crafting effective legal rules that could actually influence behavior. After all, if the law was to shape behavior, it needed to resonate with the motivations and calculations of those most likely to break it, ensuring that legal rules were practical and enforceable. This emphasis on the practical consequences of law became a hallmark of legal realism, a movement that sought to align legal principles with the realities of human conduct. Holmes's skepticism toward legal formalism and his emphasis on the evolving nature of law helped to create a more realistic and nuanced understanding of the legal system, one that was better equipped to handle the complexities of modern society. His ideas resonated with a generation of legal thinkers who were coming of age in the aftermath of World War I, a period marked by disillusionment and a growing awareness of the limitations of traditional institutions, prompting a reevaluation of long-held legal doctrines. The social and historical context in which legal realism emerged played a crucial role in shaping its core tenets. The period between the two world wars was a time of profound upheaval and transformation, marked by economic depression, political instability, and the rise of totalitarian regimes. The devastation of World War I shattered the illusion of progress and rationality that had characterized the pre-war era. The Great Depression, which began in 1929, further exposed the shortcomings of laissez-faire capitalism and the inadequacy of traditional legal mechanisms in addressing widespread social and economic inequality. The rise of fascism in Europe and the specter of communism cast a long shadow over American society, fueling anxieties about the fragility of democracy and the potential for authoritarianism. In this climate of uncertainty and fear, legal realism offered a critical lens through which to examine the role of law in society. The movement's emphasis on the social and political dimensions of law resonated with the anxieties of the time. Legal realists argued that law was not a neutral arbiter of disputes, but rather a tool that could be used to advance or hinder particular social and economic interests. This perspective challenged the prevailing view of law as a force for stability and order, suggesting instead that it could be an instrument of power and oppression. At the heart of legal realism was the idea that law was not merely a set of neutral rules, but a powerful tool that could be wielded to advance certain interests at the expense of others. This view challenged the traditional notion of law as a blind and impartial arbiter of justice. Instead, legal realists argued that law was inherently political, reflecting and reinforcing the existing power dynamics within society. They pointed to the ways in which law had been used throughout history to maintain social hierarchies, protect the privileges of the powerful, and marginalize disadvantaged groups. From slavery to Jim Crow laws, legal realists argued that law had often served as a tool of oppression rather than liberation. This recognition of law's capacity for both good and evil was a central theme in legal realist thought. They argued that understanding the social and political context in which law operated was essential for evaluating its true impact. Legal realists also challenged the assumption that judges were objective and impartial interpreters of the law. They argued that judges, like all human beings, were influenced by their own personal experiences, biases, and ideologies. These extra-legal factors, they contended, inevitably shaped judicial decision-making, even if unconsciously. This critique of judicial objectivity did not imply that judges were corrupt or acting in bad faith. Rather, it suggested that the judicial process was far more complex and nuanced than the traditional formalistic view acknowledged. Judges did not simply find the law, they actively participated in its creation and interpretation. This active participation meant that the law was constantly evolving, shaped by the very individuals who were tasked with upholding it. Legal realists believed that by acknowledging these influences, society could work towards a more transparent and just legal system. They called for a legal system that was aware of its own biases and actively sought to mitigate them, ensuring that justice was truly served for all.